Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's Omnibus edition, brought to you from the RSB showgrounds. I've just come out of Armageddon, where I bumped into the always wonderful Lawrence Zunan, dressed up as Aang again, looking for his oppa. Anyway, this week has been a really strange one. We've had the submissions open for the RSB. Those submissions are only open until June 23rd, though, so make sure you get your words in as quickly as you can. We also saw the National Party and the Coalition celebrating new benefit sanctions, which will lead to an increase in crime because that's what literally all the research says. And then on top of that, we started the search for some really super creepy, says the guy hiding in a bush outside a playground, really super creepy people who are hiding in public view on ratepayer groups, local community groups, who are trying to push alt-right disinformation narratives. So yeah, it's been a weird one. And on top of that, there was the news as well. And I didn't even get the Chris Bishop stuff in the news. It's literally been one of those days. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the episode, but before then, don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe. Hello there, kia ora. The Select Committee is now taking submissions on the ACT Party Wants to Control Everything the Government Ever Does Forever Bill, also known as the Regulatory Standards Bill. This piece of legislation would hand unprecedented power to the Minister of Regulation, who is, this guy, David Seymour. Shocker. And every new act and most of the old acts they want to review would then be put through the grinder to see if it fits the definition of good lawmaking, based on David Seymour's principles, like the ones he wanted to define the treaty with. But this act has no mention of the treaty, our founding document and cornerstone to our entire legal framework. The Waitangi Tribunal called for it to be scrapped, citing that there was no consultation with Māori, that it seeks to rewrite the constitutional arrangements of the country by changing the process in which laws are made, which therefore impacts Māori, so they should have been consulted. Not doing so actually violated the Crown's obligation to consult with Māori in good faith. Labour's Duncan Webb has pointed out that this bill favours corporate interests over environmental protections, communities and the treaty. The Greens have said that the bill itself proceeding shows that Christopher Luxon is failing to show up to support the treaty, while even Winston Peters has doubts about it, but he's allowed it to go through to the Select Committee stage. Experts online like Professor Jane Kelsey have called it a constitutional straitjacket and dangerous by infusing our laws with the far-right faux libertarian ideology of the ACT Party. Dr. Carwyn Jones has called it the Anti-Treaty Principles Bill designed to be constitutionally superior to the treaty and allowing government to bypass the document, and has even been likened to a fascist framework because it removes the ability for public servants, professionals and local authorities to apply case-by-case judgment in specific contexts when the need arises, so that they can ensure consistent regulation under the Act. The New Zealand Law Society has said that it lifts right from the US Constitution in parts which makes no sense in an Aotearoa New Zealand context, which is why they were left out of the Bill of Rights Act. It lacks definitions for key elements of the bill, like what does it mean by quality lawmaking and how do you set standards to be measured by. Lady Turete Moxon called it a law about the privileged wanting to maintain their hold on power and control and continue a system of domination, suppression, exploitation and assimilation, also known as colonization. The fact of the matter is, this is a bad law written by a minor party with undue influence on the government for 8% of the vote. ACT have tried 3 times now to get this made law, and the only reason it's happening now is because Christopher Luxon is not only a weak leader, he's one who tends to turn a blind eye to any legislation that would have detrimental impacts on Māori or relate to constitutional arrangements of the country. And it seems much of the public can see this. In fact, the initial feedback on the bill, 22,800 submissions, only 76 or 0.33% supported it. But David admitted he hadn't read the feedback he didn't like because social media people were mean and said mean things about it. Well, now submissions are open and, true to form with this coalition, submission time has been cut with only 4 weeks to get a submission in instead of the usual 6. If you want to make a submission, I'll have a link in the description below to the parliamentary website directly so you can do that. And when it comes to submissions, there's 2 things to remember. The first is that the submission needs to be in your voice, using your words. Remember the Treaty Principles Bill and all the tears from grumpy racists who use forms from Hobson's Pledge or NZCPR or other places when they weren't counted because they were forms? Avoid that by using your own words, although Seeing who's on the finance committee that's looking over this, my submission will be omitting some of the choice words I really want to say to a couple of MPs in particular. The second thing to remember is you don't have to write a novel. You can just say, I don't support this bill. Maybe chuck in a reason or two, but you don't have to. The important thing here is to have your voice heard, and it's not about who is the loudest or the most eloquent. It's about creating a chorus of voices who all stand for making sure the future of the country, its laws, the way it works, is not defined by a man who spent his time in Canada on Atlas Group-linked think tanks trying to downplay harms to Indigenous peoples who seemed fine with trying to ignite a civil war with his Treaty Principles Bill. Yeah, it is exhausting constantly trying to stop the steamroller that seems to be this government, but remember this sort of feeling in 18 months when the election rolls around. Until then, making sure your voice is part of the chorus is the best thing we can do to show we want a better future for Aotearoa together. So there, kia ora. There's a big difference between being tough on crime and being tough on criminals, and the coalition keeps conflating the two in the hope that you think locking someone up is a way to stop crime from happening. But they're actually creating the perfect conditions to increase crime while achieving nothing by increasing incarcerations. Here, let me explain. This week, we saw retailers get upset because the police are being directed by the government not to attend shoplifting crime scenes for anything under $500. There's a few other little changes in there as well around petrol drive-offs and online fraud. That's a lot of money, and police not being involved means that they're no longer a deterrent against crime. But it is a great way to start pushing the need for those tougher citizens arrest laws that they were talking about. A vanity project of one man, according to people like the head of Retail NZ. In 2024, Retail NZ surveys reinforced older data that around 82% of retailers report shoplifting as their top retail crime, and police data shows 86% of all retail crimes are under the value of $500, and the majority of those items taken are food and clothes. In fact, the most stolen food item is baby formula, indicating that a key driver here is poverty. And the research out there, all of this research, in fact, shows that poverty and unemployment, punitive welfare policies, structural inequality, a punitive system that doesn't focus on rehab, and policy directions all show that rising poverty, scarce job opportunities, and punitive welfare systems lead to a higher crime rate. The examples they research include microcosms where a 10% fall in wage growth led to a 3 to 4% increase in crime, a 1-point rise in unemployment or a 1.4 to 1.6% rise in property crime, that sanctioned beneficiaries have a 25% higher probability of becoming involved in low-level crime within 6 months, and that mass incarceration and welfare restrictions intensify poverty and social exclusion, which entrenches a cycle of crime, which is pretty much how gangs popped up here. This week saw the introduction of more benefit sanctions and the announcement of means testing for benefits for people aged 18 and 19, both of which have been cited by advocates as tools that widen the inequality gap, which that research shows increases crime. The latest Stats NZ data shows wage growth has slowed while the cost of living increases, which increases crime. The budget analysis on unemployment numbers and projections said the current unemployment rate will rise and remain high over the next 4 years, coupled with those benefit sanctions, a lack of employment opportunities, and low wage growth, all drivers of crime. In fact, the sentencing reform that this government is pushing that limits a judge's ability to reduce prison sentences based on mitigating factors like a guilty plea or age, mental impairment, even the removal of Section 27 report funding unless a defendant can pay for it themselves, it raises prison numbers, which research shows can increase reoffending rates if the system is punitive instead of reformative. The return of the three strikes law, a blanket punishment regime, erodes any kind of incentive for prisoners to rehabilitate because there's no benefit for them to do so. The under-resourcing of early intervention and mental health services means fewer people can access help for mental health and addiction issues, and these groups have a higher reoffending rate than the general prison population. Removing Te Aka Whai Ora is likely to see worsening socioeconomic disadvantages and intergenerational trauma among Māori communities, and those are both drivers for crime. Setting up faster courts, kids' boot camps, expanding police powers, and adding citizens' arrest powers are all purely punitive, which that research shows increases the chance of reoffending. because tougher punishments don't deal with the root cause of offending. On top of all these laws, changes that the so-called tough-on-crime politicians have celebrated, they've re-indexed benefits so they don't rise as fast, keeping people in poverty, and increased sanctions exponentially. They've made more people homeless, which limits their ability to work and traps them in a poverty cycle. They led us into the worst recession we've had since the 90s, which means fewer jobs and lower wage growth, increased costs, and less opportunities to get out of those poverty cycles. And they're building bigger prisons to create an even larger population of incarcerated people, all of which leads to, according to the mountains of academic research and data out there, more criminal activity as people are forced into more extreme measures to survive. So remember when Louise Upston jumps on social media to celebrate even harsher sanctions on what's meant to be a safety net? She's perpetuating a cycle that increases crime. When Mark Mitchell gets up and talks about being tough on crime, remember what he actually means is tough on some criminals, because clearly there's a level of crime that they now accept as relatively fine because it's the result of their direct policies. And while no one is arguing that if you break the law there shouldn't be consequences, if the answer is to conflate tougher consequences with real rehabilitation and make life harder so people have less options in how to handle the challenges in front of them instead of working out what can be done to help to get people into a position where doing something illegal, like stealing baby formula, is the only option they see in front of them, then you're being tough on criminals, not tough on crime. Oh there, kia ora. I need your help with something. If you're on Facebook, chances are, no matter which part of the country you're in, you've had this kind of alarmist crap pop up in your local community pages. It's part of a coordinated plan from the alt-right to scare people into voting in this year's local elections based on issues that they want to set the narrative on. Over the past 18 months to 2 years, local Voices for Freedom coordinators and members have been taking over or creating resident and ratepayer online groups, like this one from the Waipa or this one from Canterbury. At the same time, they've been setting up astroturfing websites, like this one called Better Hamilton, or this one called Concerned Ratepayers, or Better Whangarei, which is run by the NZCPR and Voices for Freedom linked astroturfing group Democracy Northland. Hell, just this week we've seen news pop up about a Wellington mayoral candidate directly linked to one of these astroturfing groups down in Wellington. We know that this has all been coordinated because there are Telegram group chats available, and even the metadata on some of the sites before they've gone live is cut and paste from a lot of those other astroturfing sites. They're sharing resources, and the narratives that they want to push are really simple. Rates are too high, where's the transparency in local councils, any debt is bad, and we need to get rid of this lot, in favour of alt-right candidates who are there to suit their own agendas and not the community. I've been working with researchers from all over the country to map out who is connected to whom, what their links are to groups like Voices for Freedom and New Zealand First, and to collect examples of how these are put into action across communities. And that's where I need your help. We can't monitor every local community group, but we want to make sure that we can track as much of the spread of disinformation as possible. So I'm hoping you might be able to act as eyes for us. I'm after screen grabs from community groups that push the narrative around things like rate increases, that vilify water fluoridation as an unwanted expense, that seem a little more unhinged than you'd expect around local elections. They'll be sharing resources from groups like Council Watch, an alt-right group whose members include people like Kaipara Mayor Craig Jepson, Auckland Councillor Ken Turner, councillors from Southland, South Waikato, Clutha, Western Bay of Plenty, Rotorua Lakes, Taupo, Manawatu, and Dunedin, who all wrote to the Prime Minister demanding that they reject any future international cooperation agreements on future pandemic responses. Or groups like Challenging Councils, which spreads racist BS to vilify water infrastructure costs, specific MPs, and any expenses that go towards anything iwi-led within councils, all while pushing pseudo-law alternatives. With these groups and their posts on Facebook, any debate with them ends in cyclical arguments made of straw men and assumptions. But if we can collate our resources, we can create a tool for wider public access to be able to track and see where these operatives are currently working, so that voters can be more informed when it comes to who they vote for in this year's local elections. So, if you come across any of these and you're feeling comfortable with it, flick me a message on this platform and we'll have a chat about how to send me content. That way you don't have to make yourself public and you don't have to air your concerns out where somebody might take offense directly with it. And remember, everyone has the right to vote for whomever they please. But if someone's manipulating the public to get that vote, that's unfair, disingenuous, and bad for democracy. But together, we can work to get voter turnout up and make sure that those that get elected in October are there for the betterment of their communities, and not to damage them, or the people who make up those communities. On tonight's episode, send in the clowns to the Deputy Prime Minister's office. Business vibes seem a little off. The Minister of Health orders workers to go into a toxic work environment, and it looks like somebody in Hamilton is defying gravity. All that and more in this week's The News. Hello there, kia ora, I'm Paul, and I hope you've done your RSB submission already. This weekend marks the handover of the Deputy Prime Minister role from Winston Peters to David Seymour, seen here introducing you to the term Clown Alley. In a recent interview with RNZ, both reiterated that Christopher Luxon was wrong to call the role largely ceremonial, with Seymour noting it didn't feel ceremonial when he was dealing with the CrowdStrike outage and Chinese warships as acting Prime Minister in the past, and Peters pointing out that Luxon was so inexperienced he wouldn't know how ceremonial the role was. The Prime Minister's office reiterated that they don't expect to see much change between the handover, pointing out, "We're replacing one far-right, misleading, vice-signalling, race-baiting, self-centered, condescending, self-promoting politician for another." Former National Party MP Dame Marilyn Waring, seen here in a place half the current coalition government is scared of because it holds facts, data and evidence, has announced the creation of a People's Select Committee to look into pay equity changes which took $13 billion from female-led workforces to pay for landlord tax cuts. Teaming up with a number of female former MPs, they will hold a public select committee, getting public feedback on the changes rushed through under urgency with no public consultation by the coalition just before the budget. Said Waring, "I already took down one annoying, bald, arrogant National Party leader who fiddled with people's retirement savings, and I'll happily do it again." David Seymour, sitting here next to his principals he brings to proposed bills like the RSB, has ruled out working with Labour and Chris Hipkins after the next election. Said Hipkins in response, "That's like fire refusing to work with water because it won't burn down the forest faster." The Clerk of the House has agreed to a shorter period of scrutiny on the controversial Regulatory Standards Bill than would usually apply. Most bills not rushed through by the government trying to avoid public scrutiny get 6 months of Select Committee hearings, but the RSB will only receive 4 months of this. With what is expected to be another high-profile amount of public submissions, the shortening of the process means again not all submissions may be heard by the committee. Said the chair of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, Cameron Brewer, seen here arguing against criminalising wage theft, "Hey, it's longer than some bills have had. The public should just be happy that there's any type of scrutiny at all." For the third month in a row, business confidence has dropped, according to the most recent ANZ Business Vibe survey. The survey found that surveyed businesses have reduced activity because, the vibes have been off. But the survey was done before the government's budget, which sprayed a fire hose of money at big businesses. So maybe the vibes have changed. Either way, reporting on business vibes seems to be a continuing trend, like it's real news. Minister of Health Simeon Brown, seen here wondering why he keeps being followed around by a 7-foot-tall skeleton in a black robe carrying a scythe, has ordered Te Whatu Ora to reverse a decision to stop posting on the alt-right swarmed platform X after they decided to move to Blue Sky as an alternative communication method. Since Elon Musk's takeover of the platform, the rise of disinformation and the vitriol of the far right has made it an unsafe online space for many. And for Government Health Organisation, it's become a lightning rod of angry reckons and rants from people whose fifth form science course somehow make them better at medicine than the organisation. Said a spokesperson for X, "Wait, the minister didn't call us Twitter? Since he's the one holding up trans-affirming care guidelines and voted against conversion therapy bans, we just figured he'd try and dead-name us." David Seymour, seen here showing why he doesn't like being asked tough questions, received a grilling in Kirikiriroa Hamilton this week as a guest of the Waikato Chamber of Commerce over his decision to put a handbrake on the proposed Waikato Medical School. In the city, the medical school is seen as a popular plan to help bolster the number of doctors in the country, while ACT maintains they need a full cost-benefit analysis before allowing it to proceed. Said Chamber President Don Good, "Our university courses have been cut, they've increased charges, they've closed down departments to make this happen. Surely hacking and slashing at things, putting people last and hoping to get better results would have spoken to this minister on some level." The government has revealed plans to slim down the expansion of the Whakatu Nelson Hospital. The original plan, signed off under the previous Labour government, would have seen an additional 92 beds added to the hospital's capacity, along with a new acute services building, 8 operating theatres, and a larger emergency department, designed to exceed minimum growth expectations to future-proof the location for the next 50 years. Which Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here still trying to process the movie Inception 15 years after it came out, has announced will no longer be going ahead. Instead, the hospital will get no new operating theatres and half the amount of new beds. Said the minister, look, it's just a hospital. It's not like they're tobacco companies who really need our help. Severe weather hit Kirikiriroa Hamilton on Thursday night as a tornado hit parts of the suburb of Norton, knocking down fences, bringing down trees, and sending a trampoline into power lines which caused widespread power cuts. Fortunately, it seems no one was hurt. Said Hamilton Mayor Paula Southgate, seen here having time travelled to ancient Egypt because building time machines is actually part of the secretive work that's done at the University of Waikato. Yes, it's true. Our airport will soon be starting flights again to Australia, but a Wizard of Oz reenactment was not how we intended to promote that. And finally, to commemorate the end of Winston Peters' term as Deputy Prime Minister, seen here smoking on the smoke-free Otago University campus, unlike our friends in mainstream media who have been fawning all over Peters with his greatest hits compilations and career retrospectives, we'll just be taking a look at this really cute puppy for a few seconds, because the amount of hate, vitriol, and bigotry he's helped normalise and pump into the country since he started flirting with dangerous conspiracy theorists and cookers doesn't warrant his ideas being idolised and everybody else celebrating him while he's still in Parliament. Right, and that's this week's news. Once again, thank you very much for the support this week. Make sure you look after yourselves, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and we'll catch you all next time. Hey, again, thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. There's a lot going on every week, and it's not even a sitting week. It's a little depressing sometimes, but I guess them's the breaks. Well, as I said at the start, don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, or subscribe to the channel to get updates. And if you're a paid subscriber, you get things like this before everybody else does. It comes out in advance. So it's like a perk of the job, and you get to have weird emojis as well that you can use there. Yeah, just give it a consider. Why not? Give it a go. All right, until next time, look after yourself, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I'll catch you guys all next time. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.